Trace and transfer can be equated to drawing and derivation. All of my works deal with the transference of a template or simple drawing into a dimensional form. The shapes are determined by stock sizes of materials and the yielding to the physical properties of tools of measurement. For example, if you bent a flexible metal ruler, it makes a certain arch. Or the dimensions of a slab of clay are only so wide, and that makes one part of the work called domesticate. I do allow the materials to dictate the dimensions of each work. I think this has to do with my interest in making the essential connection of the material to the form. The connection between each work is through the transfer of a drawing and/or a template into form. This grouping of works, called drawing and derivation, are lighter, less massive than that of, say, spatial summation, where space is solidified. In relation to domesticate, linear projection, and the iron cast pieces called spatial divergence and expanded arch, the effort is to spatialize the line. Linear projection is actually the transference of a drawn line into a dimensional material. Therefore, the line goes from a 2D to a 3D representation. Because the medium of charcoal is light enough to be absorbed by the plaster, it is like the fresco process. If one talks of singularity and uniqueness, the making of two asks you to look closer, to analyze what is before you. It is either yes or no, either it works or it doesn't. But two poses the question of why, how. It takes a closer look at the making, the process. It devalues the original and broadens the understanding of the concept. Donald Judd said something to the effect of repetition as just one after another. In my understanding of this, it talks about the anonymous nature of the making of objects in repetition. It is less about the individual creative genius than it is about the mechanical reproduction of the same form. It introduces the artist as the machine rather than the artist. Plaster is the catch-all material for casting, working directly, submersing, capturing, and solidifying. It allows an idea to be transferred without interruption from beginning concept to finished form. It mediates well because it is a characterless material, and it relies on its host to make up its physical characteristics. I suppose unless I were to show a pile of dry powder or a hard splattering of plaster by themselves, would plaster take on its own characteristics. As I use it, plaster is defined the moment it is cast onto another object or pattern. It is not my favorite refining material because it takes effort to preserve it. It is always chipping and falling apart. It has a fragility to it. Domesticate exhibits quite a unique development of a concept. Perhaps the origin and the result are quite different, but it is quite rare that one work tackles two topics. One is repetition, as I just referred to, and the other being this domestic geography. The work deals with the act of drawing, whether it is a direct transference of the drawn line or how a line can delineate space. I use templates and start with simple forms. Scale and dimension are determined by deference to instruments of measurement and standard dimensions of industrial materials. Linear projection deals with the direct act of transference by not simply drawing the line on the arch form, but capturing the mark that is made on the flat surface. It is then transferred to the plaster by casting it into the surface. In a way, it is the act of capturing the line as it jumps off the 2D plane. What does the drawn line look like bent into space? Contour divergence attempts to look at both sides of the line. In essence, it allows the viewer to look at the back of the front. The same arched line that delineated linear projection now determines the general shape of contour divergence, only now we are able to look behind it by simple reorientation to the work. Do the lines of the surface define the object as recognizable? Does it matter? The makeup of the contour lines seem to talk more about the drawn line than the volume of the shape. Iron casting, or metal casting, I've always appreciated because I have a little bit of history with it. Working with someone to produce my work allowed me to focus on other elements of the work and to, in a way, witness the process. As with a lot of the work that I had made for me, I've been able to have this a priori experience with the work, meaning I was able to design the work in my head through drawing and past experience with the machines, materials, and process. I developed some theories of how the work could be made and then had to witness the result of having someone else do it. In some cases I was able to step in to redirect them, stop them, but in some cases it was completely out of my hands. The process of sand molding is a direct way of working. That process is one way to work direct off of a pattern. It is the usual way they, or the founders, cast iron. Iron is also a way to get back visually to the lead material of the original impression. Just color-wise, it reproduced that in the same way. Metal, as long as it is not interrupted by a wax casting or by adding other processes, stays direct, and it is still a valid material. This bridge form deals with the sense of drawing by the use of a template. In my entire process history, I have always been interested in stoneworking. It has this primitive quality to it. It is essentially the first direct material. It is a love of labor, I suppose, and I have a bit of training in it, and appreciate its durability, obdurance, polishing qualities, the ability to contrast itself, and the character. It is a material that seems to exist between an ancient history and a contemporary relevance. As I watched them make it, I intervened in the cutting process. They used a moving bridge saw to cut the work, and I stopped them with the long horizontal cuts. Otherwise, they would have polished the whole thing. They did some incidental patterning. I like these because of the transference of the drawing and its connection to the spatialization of a line. I used to do this kind of work in the US. I had a bridge saw and knew what they could do and could do with the machine. So I set up a situation where they could do something that I could do here in my studio. Expanded arch and keystone arch, both are compositions that are based on the use of a template and translated into different mediums. The keystone pattern started in bridge and continues into both expanded arch and keystone arch. There is this element of reduction and expansion that happens with both compositions, essentially two ways of spatializing an arched form.